to thank everybody for coming.
Let's do the load of that.
I really appreciate you coming here and listening. Thank you very much. My name is Michael Saiber, and I am fortunate to be here at this event and talking to people perhaps all over the world. Okay. What I do is I am a gatherer, a harvester of a unique food. The food is called a Phanazamanon flossicula. It's an aqua botanical that's harvested in just one place in the world, in southern Oregon, at the base of the Cascade Mountains and a little bit north of the majestic, mystical Mount Shasta. What I'm going to talk about today is my journey to how I got here, and tell you a little bit about what we do, the food that we harvest, how it influenced my life, and what happened coming up to where I am right now. Going back to what I do, the harvesting of this food. This food literally changed my life, and has helped very many other people. I had become aware of the connection between food, what we eat, what we put into our mouths, and what might happen at an early age as I began to notice that my relatives were suffering and dying prematurely of various diseases. I then learned at an age of about 17, as I watched my friend's father, who was extremely overweight, get a heart attack and change and become an organic gardener and correct his heart condition without getting an operation, losing maybe 70 or 80 pounds. And that was my first introduction. And I used to remember going to his house, looking into his refrigerator, and seeing a totally different scene than I saw in any place else, including mine. That was my first awakening. It took a number of years beyond that to get to where I am now. What you see up on the screen right now is a picture of me at a, not a very good picture, at a very early age when I was a competitive bodybuilder. 50 years ago, I didn't have a clue about health. Narcissistic, yes, but I had no endurance. I used to be a competitive athlete in a number of different sports. Then, as time went on, I was working my way through college, and I got a chance to travel to many circuses, fairs, and carnivals. And I made friends with a unique woman. Her name was Dolores. And Dolores was extremely unique. And as you see in this next picture, she was actually 8 feet 1 inch tall. And we became friends, and I began seeing her from place to place. And one day I went in and I saw her, and she was crying. And I said, Dolores, what's the matter? And she was a very young woman at the time. She was in her 20s. And she said, well, this guy that I went on the road with promised me all kinds of things and never delivered any of them. And I'm sad, and I want to go home. And I tried to comfort her because we had become friends by then. And she says, listen, she says, I kind of like what I'm doing. It's interesting. I get to talk to people. She came from a tiny little town in Louisiana, and she convinced me to build a unit, and we went out on the road together. Now, the reason I'm showing you these pictures is because these are people that I met along the way that changed the course of my life, that I believe, I actually know that I could have saved, that died at a premature early age due to the fact that they were eating a toxic, horrible, poisonous diet. And at the time, I really didn't have the knowledge to be able to save them. If I had the knowledge I have now, I feel that a number of them would have been with me. Dolores got cancer and unfortunately died at 25 years old. So she was a friend that was one of them. Anyway, when I went with her, we had a very good time together. We traveled around, and I began getting approached by other people that were unique in this world. This was a very interesting and strange world of these people that I traveled with. There's another picture of Dolores. There she was in the hospital shortly before she died, and there's a picture of me when I was very young with her. Now, if any of you out there have any questions, you can feel free to ask me. Okay, this is John Lang. And this is an interesting story too. This is a man that called me up, finding out what I was doing, and said that he would like to meet me and that he has nothing else to live for, and wanted to know if I would be interested in meeting him and having him go out on the road with me as Dolores did. There he is as a Korean veteran, and he used drugs. He became self-destructive, and when I actually went to meet him, this is what I saw. He went from a normal man to 1,171 pounds there. And when I walked in and saw him, to say that I was shocked is an understatement. So that's what, from that, from that to that. So he went around and exhibited, and we supported a drug and heroin rehabilitation center with part of the proceeds that came in from that. And it was my goal to bring him back to normal. That was the exhibit. It was a mobile hospital that he traveled in. And it was interesting. It was an interesting part of my life because these people were all different personalities, and I had to juggle and handle this. But he went from being a recluse in this tiny little room where I met him into being a star. He was interviewed all the time. He was on television stations and newspapers. And then he lost a lot of weight. As you can see there's a huge difference between before. When a person is that large, the adipose tissue doesn't really go away. In other words, they lose their flexibility. So what I wanted to do was bring him back to normal and get apron operations to take off that extra flesh that you see, how flat he got there. However, he also fell victim. He was a medical oddity whenever the doctors saw him, because he did have a lot of medical issues. They wanted to experiment with him. They couldn't find where his organs even were. It was a real challenge. And he eventually also died at a young age. Now there's a unique picture. I doubt if any of you can figure that out, because it looks pretty impossible, doesn't it? I mean, how can that be possible? There he is lying on his back, obviously. But what that is an optical illusion. That's actually a fold in his skin. And that's me rolling him over. I just thought I'd show you that photo because it was quite amazing.
So he couldn't roll himself over?
No, he couldn't move. He couldn't walk. He couldn't do anything. In order to get him into that mobile hospital that you saw, we actually had a number of firemen in a forklift truck to put him in there. No, he couldn't walk at all. Never from the time that I knew him. Even when he lost the weight, he was still too large.
How much weight did he lose?
I would say he probably lost about 400 pounds from one time to another with it. But it wasn't enough, and I didn't have the real knowledge at that time to be able to know. You know, I put him on a diet, And it was very difficult too, because he was a compulsive eater. He continued to eat. He had a telephone, and so when people weren't looking, he would order pizza. He would have that kind of thing. So it wasn't like he went straight down in weight.
What kind of diet did you put him on?
I put him on a restricted calorie diet and tried to keep him away from carbohydrates. But I didn't have the knowledge of a real plant-based diet. I didn't have any of the knowledge I had now. That's why I said I could have saved so many of these people if I would have been able to educate them and actually feed them the kind of foods that really would have avoided them getting in a state of disease and then dying.
So this is all before you went to stay with Dr. Wigmore?
This was before I actually went and learned about raw food and got to stay at Hippocrates with Dr. Wigmore. Okay, then there you see a picture of a dear friend of mine, very interesting story. He was an inspiration to me. His name was Carl Norwood, and I met him one time that I was at the State Fair in Atlanta, Georgia, and I walked by and there was a show there that had two people in it, and it was called The Half Man and the Frog Boy. And Carl, who you see there, was considered the Frog Boy. And that's my friend Andy. But he was an inspiration. He had the best attitude no matter what. He was always up. And there he is with his adopted father, Dick Hilburn. Now, Dick Hilburn was an interesting man, too. Both of them died early, and both of them died because of food poisoning, what I call. Eating a horrible diet and being compromised to start off with because of their genetics. But the story is that Dick, who was the one that was a half man, now there's a man that was born with no legs. He had 2 feet that came out of his trunk, and 1 hand that came out of one shoulder, and 1 arm. And he would drive his own equipment around, his own trucks. He painted the front of the show. And one day, somebody brought Carl to meet him, years before I knew him, and he and his wife adopted Carl, and they went on the road together. I got to know them, and when Dick passed away, when he died, Carl and I were friends, and Carl called me up, and he wanted to go on the road with me, and he did. And as I say, it was a real challenge being on the road with these special people and doing what I did. And no matter what, no matter how much aggravation I had or whatever, he would always be up. And I would say, why should I possibly have stress or any kind of aggravation when there was, Carl. And when I met him, he was getting around. The reason they called him a frog boy is that he didn't have any knees. He had just 2 legs that came out of his trunk that were curved like that. And so he was getting along on a little skateboard. And there he is with Little Richard, who was a very unique character, and they traveled together. We traveled together on the road with him. Little Richard was a extreme womanizer and egotist, and Carl was very practical, very smart, saved all his money. He had a drive-in restaurant, he had property and all that. And Richard, if there was a woman involved and he could be with them, nothing mattered. He would just disappear. And he was a real character. So I traveled on the road with both of them. Now, Richard I lost track of, but Carl did pass away early. Do you have any questions about any of these people? I'm happy to answer them. No? Okay. That was the show that Richard and Carl were in. Richard was going blind, and so we raised donations for the eye bank. And there I am, and there's another one of the men that I traveled with. His name was John, and that was me at a young age in some strange pants, indeed, as I look at it. But that was the era of that. And the other man there is the Lilliputian, a Hungarian Lilliputian midget that was happened to be in New Orleans around the same time we were, and he was and Ringling Brothers was advertising the world's smallest man, and we were, and so they came over to visit to see who actually was smallest, and Richard and Carl were actually smaller, but that's him, and that's with John. And there's another picture, a couple of friends that came to visit, John and myself, and they're still alive. And those are actual Siamese twins. They were joined together from the waist down. Okay, that's the end of the slideshow. So what I would like to say is that we are living in a society that is suffering. People suffer very much in this world. They suffer from many diseases. They suffer psychologically. They suffer from depression. A lot of that is caused by what they take into their bodies, by their mindset. The people that are watching out there are going to get some unique opportunity because of the fact that this is being live streamed video. You're going to get an opportunity to listen to people and their experiences that they've had in the world, people that have had experiences dealing with people that have been dying, sick, and restored by changing their habits. So take the opportunity to listen. Listen to Dr. Brian Clement. Listen to the Mad Cowboy. Listen to John Robbins. And learn a lot of what their experience says. Learn that the foods you're eating are not only hurting you, but could be hurting very many other people. Interesting to note that somebody who is a vegetarian eating a plant-based diet and drives a Hummer is leaving a much lighter carbon footprint for global warming than somebody who is a meat eater and driving a Prius. There are approximately 6 billion people living on the earth, and many of them are starving. A large portion of the world is starving. People in this country, in the United States and in Canada, are starving. Not nutritionally, not that their bellies aren't full, but they're starving for nutrition. Things are radically wrong with our culture. Things that need to be corrected. People's awareness need to be increased. People need to understand that what they're doing will have an effect on their children, on their grandchildren. It's important. The message that we're giving is more than just individual. So with my life and what's happened to me, I feel that I have been very blessed to have been aware and have my eyes opened over a period of time. I mentioned before that I stayed with Dr. Ann Wigmore. Well, she's somebody who was a leader in the world of health. She was taking people that were sick and dying out of the hospitals and feeding them a plant-based raw food diet. And they were getting better, many of them. Dr. Brian Clement, who you can hear speaking if you listen to it, Dr. Brian Clement took that torch from her. His Hippocrates clinic heals very many people. People can be healed of disease by changing their diet. People can prevent getting disease by eating a higher conscious, organic, raw, higher conscious diet. You don't have to go from eating a standard American diet to being a totally raw diet, but the more you get to that point, the more you go towards a healthier diet, the better you'll be. The more unlikely you will be to get in a state of disease, the more likely you are to be in a good frame of mind, because when somebody doesn't feel good, when somebody doesn't feel well, when somebody doesn't feel happy, it doesn't just affect them, it affects their whole family. Don't you agree?
Totally.
And so I give this message that the people that are listening, read, listen, observe, increase their consciousness, try to do things that are better, more nurturing for themselves, for their families, and little by little, I feel that our culture will improve, things will be better. Last night, I had the opportunity to listen to John Robbins, and I never had the opportunity to hear him speak before. But some of what he said was extremely powerful and interesting. One of the stories that he told was about Julia Childs, who probably all of you know. She was quite famous. And she was a foodie, certainly about gourmet food and gourmet dishes. And one of the things that she mentioned was how wonderful veal was. Well, John Robbins had occasion to tell her what actually happens, how veal is raised, what's done to the animals, and actually took her to a place where veal was being produced. And she saw it and she says, never again veal. All of these things, all of these people that are raising the consciousness so that people actually have a connection to what they're doing and how it's affecting overall life, animals in general. I think it's important.
The vibration or energy of the food, do you think that has anything to do with it?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think the way it's prepared, how it's grown, I think people should grow more of their own food. People should support organic farming. People should stay away from things that are chemical, putting in their body or on their body. Talk about the E3 Live, which is what we call the Ephanazomenon flossiqua that we harvest. Now, there is a food that existed for tens of thousands of years. Indigenous people actually consumed the food. It's a food that changed my life. I, as I told you before, used to be a competitive athlete. I also, for the last probably close to 40 years, have been conscious about what I was eating, more and more conscious about what I was eating. And then I found this food that grows in Klamath Lake, Oregon, and it began to increase my endurance. And 50 years ago when I competed, and I used to compete on a national level, I really had very little endurance. This gave me more endurance than I had back then. It was really astounding to me. It brought me up to the lake, and I tried it. My partner was born and raised on the lake, Tamara, and she was a harvester. And I tried this food fresh because in my mind I knew that it had to be more powerful, fresh, coming out of the lake than it was in a capsule or in a powder. And I tried it, and the results were amazing. It not only helped me from the standpoint of my physical self, my endurance, but it helped me psychologically, mentally. It helped me with my mood, and it helped me with my focus. Growing up if they had a diagnosis back then, which they didn't, I was just a very restless kid and a bad student, it would have been ADD and ADHD, and I'm sure they would have put me on a psychotropic drug like Ritalin or one of the other drugs, which I'm glad they didn't have then because they didn't do that. So it helped me dramatically with my focus, with my mental ability. So I thank God for that and for the knowledge that I have gained in all of this. Do you have a question, young lady? Okay. Do you have any questions?
What kind of athlete were you? What sport did you do?
I competed in a number of sports, but the one that I tested in and the one that I continued to do that I realized it was swimming.
Okay.
I was a competitive swimmer.
And with the algae, I've heard somewhat that they can rob oxygen from the body, which seems, if you're saying they improve endurance, that doesn't seem to gel there.
Well, it does the opposite of that.
Okay.
Now, when you say the algae, that's very interesting, because there are actually tens of thousands of different varieties of algae that exist. And actually, most people are under the misconception that the oxygen comes from the trees. It really comes from the algae that grow. Some algae are beneficial and good to eat. Some algae are not, and some algae are toxic. So you can't group them into a whole thing and say that's what it is. But the algae, the Aphanizomenon falciqua, that we call the E3 and the E3 live, did the complete opposite. And the reason I was so amazed at what it did is because I was eating very consciously at the time. So it filled in the blanks. And here is a food that grows in the wild. This is nothing that we create. It's not a formulation or really a supplement. To speak, it's a whole food that grows. And depending on how one looks at the world or life, it's created by God or nature. And with all of the higher conscious eating that I was doing, this filled in the blanks. And where I would have come up against the wall, so to speak, in other words, you're swimming and then or you're doing any kind of an endurance sport and you just give out, it let me go beyond that by triple, actually, at one time. So the difference, the fact that I would have more endurance now than I had 50 years ago was, quite a thing for me.
And working with athletes, how do you recommend that they use it, like pre and post event or pre and post exercise?
Well, both. As a food, it'll improve them right along, and even right before an event. Now, I don't compete anymore. I'm, way beyond that age that I can do that. Although some of my friends encourage me to go into Senior Olympics, I haven't done that. I'm busy enough with. But yeah, and I mean, and this also, this food that we have, I did something originally when I discovered this and when we started to do it, and many of the people that I work with said that I was really crazy for doing it. But we market this food with an unconditional 1-year guarantee. That means whoever uses it, if they're not satisfied with the results, anytime up to a year, we give them their money back, whatever the results is that they want. So.
Is the algae, is it the only kind of algae that grows in the clam?
No, there's actually other species that grow, but it's not edible. So we do the single species of the Aphanizomenon falciqua.
I'm curious how you grow it in the lake.
It grows.
It just grows.
It's a wild-grown food. It's
Yeah.
like dandelion greens or like any of the other
So
wild-grown foods.
you can see the difference by color, which algae.
Oh no, you can actually see it, but we check everything.
Yeah.
We're under extremely strict guidelines. The guidelines that we're on are amazing, and we sell a lot of the clinics and doctors that use our products because we live in such an extremely litigious society. We test for things that are never even in there, so we have very strict standards.
And just from athletic performance, is it something that's good? I know you said endurance, but is it a muscle builder as well, or is it just it just adds more oxygen into the system? How do you feel it works?
Okay, well here's what's in it. And we have a number of people that are bodybuilders that use it, natural bodybuilders, because it's not anything like a steroid or anything like that will give you huge muscles. But the bodybuilders that use it get great results. Here's the secret to it, and here's what it is. Here you have a food that has virtually every micro and macro mineral that there are. It has almost every vitamin except a couple that you need. It's got a perfect amino acid balance, which is a protein balance, as much as 67% pure protein, vegetable protein in it. It's got omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, a huge amount of chlorophyll. The secret to it is the thing that makes a difference between going into a drugstore or a health food store and buying a vitamin that seems to have everything in it is that it's 97% assimilable by the body, usable by the body. So what it does for people, it fills in the blank. Everybody has different genetics, so it affects everybody. That people get different benefits from it, but it really works.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you harvest it for selling?
We harvest it. We have our own harvesters. We go out. Now this is the lake that it grows in is a very unique ecological system. It's harvested we're at 4,100 feet above sea level in a very ancient volcanic area. 7,500 years ago approximately, Mount Mazama erupted. A huge eruption of a volcano, hundreds of times bigger than St. Helens, that happened in recent times, blew the top off of this giant mountain and created Crater Lake, which is one of the wonders of the Western world. And that explosion put volcanic ash all over this. This is a 140 square mile lake, mountain lake that this grows in. And that's the substrate or the soil that this plant actually grows on. You take that, and also the fact that it's geothermal. This is fed by volcanic springs that still exist. And this Crater Lake, which is one of the deepest lakes in the world, feeds underground streams into this lake body. And what you have is an ecologically a system that actually grows this amazing food. Yeah.
And then how is it actually harvested?
We have harvesters that go out. We harvest in the deepest part of the lake, in the ancient channel where the river came through. And the harvester has a tube that goes slightly under the water because this algae, and it has to be an exact time. There may be sometimes only 10 or 20 days in an entire year that we can harvest this. It has to be just exactly right, where the Aphanizomenon is blooming. It can't be wind, because if there's wind, it goes down. And this tube goes under the water, or we have belts that pick it up. Mm-hmm.
And then it's in a capsule form?
We do it in, yes, we do it in capsules, and we do it in powder. But the most powerful, in other words, the least processed, is the frozen liquid. Have you had it before?
I think I just had it yesterday for the first time here.
Yeah, that's what it is. Do you have any questions, young man? Okay. In closing, I'd like to thank everybody for listening, for hearing this presentation. I hope everybody is blessed by higher consciousness, makes better choices, and makes this a better world to live in. Thank you.